So moving on to today's session, for this webinar, we have a brilliant panel of speakers from our AI working group who will be discussing their experience of exploring new product opportunities with Gen AI. So our first speaker is Chloe Langan.
Hi, everyone.
Chloe is a senior UX consultant who's passionate about making technology inclusive and accessible, with a strong interest in AI and voice technologies. Before joining the CXPartners team in 2022, Chloe worked as an AI and innovation consultant at Soprasteria. Our second speaker is Tom Scott.
Hi, everyone.
As Experience Director in CXPartners' private sector team, he's responsible for planning and leading key projects and programs while contributing to the development of strategy and practice at a company level. Previously, Tom established user-centered design at Tesco Groceries, transforming it from a one-person role into a large interdisciplinary team. Our third speaker is Henry Bacon.
Hello.
As UX consultant at CXPartners, Henry is involved in all stages of the design process, going from initial research all the way to delivering live services. Henry brings over a decade of experience in digital design, and over the years, he's worked with clients from various sectors, ranging from finance, energy to the NHS. And then our final speaker is Sam Stevens.
Hello.
As principal UX consultant, Sam guides clients through their knottiest problems, helping them explore new opportunities through user-centered design. With over 10 years in the industry, he's worked across in-house and startup design teams, always focusing on creating seamless experiences across physical and digital touchpoints. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that this is a one-way webinar, so no one can see you or hear you, so feel free to eat your lunch without the fear that we can see you. And finally, if you have anything you'd like to ask throughout the session, please do add it to the Slido at the bottom of your screen, and I'll pop back at the end and we can go through the questions. So handing over to you, Chloe.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks everyone for joining today. We're really excited to be talking to you about this. It's a topic that we've been looking into for a little bit. And it's nice to just talk to other people about it, really. I think, Sam, if you move to the next slide, thank you. So like I just said, so AI seems to have come on absolutely leaps and bounds in the last few years, and generative AI, especially like ChatGPT, has seemed to suddenly have popped up everywhere, and everyone seems to be talking about it. And there are so many questions that seem to be sort of like flying around about AI, and they're not that easy to answer at all. So it's things like, what could we use it for? How will it impact our lives? As well as things around ethics and regulation as well. There's so many, and they're quite tricky to answer. So at CXPartners, all of these questions are things that we've been thinking about as well. And there was a small group of us who just sort of became really interested in AI, and we came together just to try and start answering some of these questions, and just be really curious really around where AI could actually take us realistically. And Lauren just did a fab intro for everyone, but I wanted to sort of explain the roles that everyone plays in our little AI working group that we've got. So Henry is absolutely on the ball with all of the new AI developments and trends. If there's anything going on, Henry is almost the first person to know about it. And Tom is also equally amazing at keeping on top of trends, but also has a really great perspective on how we can use it as UXers. Sam is one of our experts in innovation and prototyping, so he brings really great knowledge around all of that side of things. And then my background is actually in an AI, so I studied language technology at university, and so yeah, I sort of look more at the back end of things and how things actually work. And together in our team, we've just started to run some really lightweight mini experiments just to try and start answering some of these really big questions that everyone seems to be having. And the first mini experiment that we've been running was, how can we start designing products with generative AI? So things like ChatGPT, how can we actually start designing things that work for people using this cool new technology that seems to be available? And what we're going to be talking to you today is literally about exactly that. We want to talk a little bit about our mindset and how we've approached AI. as well as this experiment that we've been doing into how we could maybe use Gen AI in the future and what we've learned from that as well. And I think ultimately the point of this is that we wanted to share as much of what we've learned as possible with the community, and just be as open about it as possible as well. Because I think ultimately it's really interesting how many people are interested in this sort of thing, and it's really lovely to learn together as a group. It's really nice when you've got something as daunting as AI to have some friends to go on the journey with you. And also when you join everyone together, we've got the opinion that you can just be so much more powerful as well. So we may not have all of the answers to everyone's questions. We're not saying that we do, but we wanted to end on a little Q&A as well. But it'd be really good just to hear everyone's thoughts and just sort of share everyone's feelings and comments and opinions about AI, as well as any questions that you might have, just so that we can start some conversations going. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Tom to talk a little bit about our mindset.
Thanks, Chloe. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about, I guess, some of the things that we were thinking about as we went into this experiment, and hopefully that kind of tee things up nicely for Henry kind of going into what we actually did. So I guess, you know, we all love ideas. Ideas are great, aren't they? And we all have lots of them all the time, and that's a wonderful thing. It's really easy to believe that those ideas, when we're brought to life, you know, they start to make the world a better place, and that's kind of what, I guess that's what we hope is going to happen. In reality, I guess it can often work somewhat differently. You know, if we have an idea, we put lots of effort into building something, and then we put it out in the world, and then the messy reality of the world starts to hit, and things start to happen that we hadn't anticipated. Maybe people aren't as interested as we thought they would be, or as interested as we are. People find things that we've made, they find them hard to use, or people use the things we've made in unexpected ways, and they're not ready for them. And then there are consequences that we just can't anticipate. So because of this, we had some, I guess, a set of questions going into this that we wanted to answer about Gen AI before we kind of put something out into the world. So, you know, what is actually possible with the technology, and what's possible with the technology that's really accessible? Is it valuable to use it? Henry's going to talk about an idea that we had. We want to find out, is that valuable to users at all? And then, what if we create that? How's the AI going to behave? We're used to, as designers, designing quite predictable systems. They might have logic in them, but we're mapping out those structures. Now we're working with a tool that somewhat has a mind of its own. And then when we put that together with people who are also unpredictable and do the unexpected, like how are how is the AI and people going to react? We don't know. And then with all of that going on, is it safe for the people using it? Is it safe for us as an organization? And then quite often we're working within compliant kind of spaces. Is it compliant with regulation, or what's the implications for regulating something like this? And then, as I said earlier, there's just things that we can't predict as well when things start to kind of become real. So because of this, we had I guess a different mindset that we wanted to use. So we have an idea. We wanted to test that fast, and to do that, we wanted to create a sandbox, a space where we could experiment while the reality hits, and do that safely. So that means kind of making it safe to fail. So it's creating prototypes rapidly and not investing lots of money up front, but getting to something tangible, something interactive early, and then testing that early and doing that often. And crucially, involving real people. not just working on our assumptions, but actually putting it out there within this safe space, getting people involved, seeing how they react to it, how they respond to it, and how the AI does the same. And with that in mind, we then are able to kind of manage that, the kind of the reality hits in a controlled way, and that can help to guide us to a better world, make that more likely. So, as we all know, good ideas start with a good problem to solve. And ours was the advice gap, which you may or may not be familiar with. Many people would benefit from professional financial advice, but they can't get it. People with large amounts of wealth can often afford it, or they get it for free because there are kind of commission-based advice services. But if your wealth is more modest, then these services may not be available to you. They may be too expensive, or those kind of commission-based services just not on offer. And without advice, it's harder for people to make good choices about saving money, investing, and planning for their retirement. So the advice gap can make it really tough for people to become more financially secure and prepare themselves for their futures. So with this in mind, we wanted to chip off something that was manageable. This is a big problem to solve. So we focused in on pensions, and we wanted to understand really what potential Gen AI may have to provide guidance around pensions. And guidance is a deliberate word. So we're not at this stage, again, we've kind of been quite modest in our aims. We're not trying to offer full financial advice, which is heavily regulated. But guidance is something that potentially could be offered. And the distinction there is complex, but essentially you're not making recommendations about specific things that people do, but you're helping them to understand their situation and letting them do more of the decision making. And with that in mind, maybe that could go in the future to helping to address the advice gap. So I'm going to hand over to Henry now, who's going to walk us through what we did.
Thanks, Tom. So that brings us to our first AI experiment, which, as Tom just said, was to try and use Gen AI to help bridge this advice gap. Now, yeah, it's fair to say this was a bit different to our usual work. First of all, we were obviously very solution and tech focused in this. Those two things we'd normally try and avoid. But with this, we knew from the start that we wanted to create something using Gen AI. Secondly, we didn't have time to run the discovery. We simply chose the advice gap as our sort of problem edge to work to. It's a space we have experience of here at CX, and we could say, okay, we'll try and create an AI service that helps to solve this. We still, however, wanted to stay as user-centered as possible, and make sure that we put whatever we created in front of real users. We were really interested just in what the user experience would be like with an entirely Gen AI service. So after an ideation session, our team came up with an idea for a service we called Pension Bot. And this would be an AI chatbot designed to provide free pension guidance to all UK citizens in a way that's just easy for them to understand. And since it would be free and accessible to everyone, in theory, it would remove the problem of cost when it comes to getting financial advice. But this was just an idea. It sounds fine. It might be great. It might really not be great. It's in reality, who knows what value it has without being able to test it with real people. And that's what we really wanted to do. So we made a prototype, and we did this because we felt that even though we were working with AI, this new revolutionary technology, this process of building a prototype and quickly testing with users we felt was still going to be the fastest and the lowest risk way to gauge whether our idea had any value or not. But it's I think it's worth pointing out here as well that this was just our hunch at this point. Prototyping with AI was something we hadn't done before, since it's so new. So we were just really interested in seeing whether this process, still worked for Gen AI. So to go into a bit more detail about how we built it, we used a feature, an OpenAI feature called Custom GPT. And this basically allows you to create your own GPTs, or bots as we call them, in a way that requires no coding or any sort of technical skills at all, really. You simply give it written instructions, so just via text, on what you want it to do. And then, in theory, it should just start doing it. And yeah, OpenAI have deliberately made this process extremely easy to use. And basically, it made the whole process possible for us, as for individuals who haven't got any serious AI developer skills. But there's probably many different ways to create AI prototypes now, and I expect there'll be increasingly so. But this was just a way that we picked because it worked for us at the time. And it's interesting too because Google have just announced their own version of this sort of feature with Gemini, and they announced it at the recent I/O conference. So soon you'll be able to do this with Gemini to create what they're calling gems, so your own bespoke little AIs. So that's interesting too. So we found writing the instructions for our AI was just a really interesting activity and experience in itself. Because as I mentioned, the instructions box currently in OpenAI is simply just a free text base. It doesn't give you any prompts or guidance, and there's no established best practice for this as it's such a new technology. So we just basically had to work out a way that made sense for us. And we did this by organizing our instructions into broad categories that we felt made the most sense and would have the most impact on the user's experience. So things like the bot's role, its conversational structure, its tone of voice, its do's and don'ts. So, for example, do always try and source pension information from these credible sources, and don't start writing haikus or try to answer any questions unrelated to pensions. And it was really interesting because as we did this, we became increasingly aware of the fact that what we were doing now was no longer designing the content, which is perhaps what we've done until now, but in fact we were designing the author, which was a real shift in sort of mindset. And once we had those categories down, we could just put them all out onto a mirror board, like the one you're seeing here, which we called our sort of AI template. And then we could fill out each of those categories with the instructions that we wanted the bot to have. And we found this a really valuable workshop activity, actually, which we recommend trying out if ever you're doing this. So ideally, we'd say do it as a group with a mixture of SMEs, UXers, content writers, perhaps some users, ideally, to really help you try and get down the best AI experience and most useful for users that you can imagine at the time. And once we had that all down, then we could feed our instructions into our custom chat GPT and quickly bring PensionBot to life, which is what you're seeing a screenshot of here. And we'll do a little demo of it shortly. Now, once it was functioning, then we were able to quickly test it ourselves through interacting with it. And then we could adjust the instructions based on the responses it was giving us. We also collaborated with a UK financial advisor, gave him access to the bot so he could interact with it and he could give us his feedback on the answers it was providing him. And this was really critical because obviously we're not pension experts ourselves. So we weren't in a position to really assess the validity of the pension guidance it was giving. So working with knowledgeable SMEs, I suspect is going to be even more crucial than it ever was when designing Gen AI services like this. And we reached a point where, yeah, he was really impressed with the quality of the guidance it was providing. And we felt, confident enough that it was in a decent enough state that we were ready to test it with users. So in all, this took us about 3 days, and we had, quickly and basically for free, an AI service that we could now test with users in a low risk way. And yeah, we're going to give you a little bit of a demo now of Pension Bot, just to give you a sort of a taste of the experience and see what it was like. So here you can see it, and I've just asked it, what do I need to consider when planning how much to contribute to my pension? So here it came back with age, recommended goals, current income and expenses. It also suggests always checking with a real human financial advisor. That was an important caveat we felt we should put in there. So based on that information, I then ask it for some information on what I need to do to qualify for a UK state pension. And then it starts giving me an answer such as, number of years national insurance contributions, qualifying, the state pension age, and a link to the Gov website to check the information there as well. So yeah, that's just a little taste of Pension Bot. We were actually planning on doing a live demo, but it was ChatGPT was having some issues this morning, which is also an interesting thing in itself, just the nature of using this sort of AI, Gen AI software and the, perhaps some of the risks. So at that point, yeah, we tested it with some users, and I'll hand over now to Sam to tell you how it went.
Thanks so much, Henry. So yeah, what did we learn from user testing Pension Bot? I guess, yeah, first of all, actually, we were just surprised as to how well it performed when answering people's questions about their pensions. However, whilst we were user testing, we spotted a number of opportunities for improvement, specifically within the financial guidance use case, but also thinking more generally when prototyping a new product idea with AI. So let's dive in and see what we saw. So our first observation then was around blank page syndrome. And I guess what we mean by this is that quite simply, we spotted that people were really struggling with actually just knowing what to ask Pension Bot. Blank page syndrome can be a fairly typical challenge that people can feel when interacting with a new product or service. And it's super important when you're designing to really be aware of how different people's context, their goals, and how their motivations can impact their experience. For example, you might be using a service like Airbnb, and in some instances, know exactly what it is that you're looking for and be able to define straight off the bat the destination, the dates that you're interested in traveling, perhaps the type of accommodation that you're looking for, and how much you'd be hoping to spend, so that you can kind of start that search straight away without any additional prompts or hand-holding. However, pensions can be a pretty complex topic, and it's really worth recognizing that, yeah, people are kind of starting with different levels of understanding about their pension and considering that everyone's pension and their financial goals are unique and specific to them. So as a result of this, people were typically finding it tricky to know which question to ask to get that conversation started with the AI. Also, what question to follow up with to one of PensionBot's answers. So when the bot was able to make a suggestion or ask a follow-up or suggest a specific topic to start talking about, it really helped to actually just alleviate some of the pressure of knowing what to ask and provided a starting point, enabling greater and much richer conversations. All of these things start to signal actually how you can potentially create higher levels of engagement and reach a better outcome from each conversation. And what we heard from one of our participants was them saying out loud, "I'm not sure, tell me what I need to be asking." And I guess this just really reflects the complexity that perhaps they're navigating and the experience that they may have come to expect when interacting with a human financial advisor, and how a human financial advisor would help to kind of guide them through that process. Our second observation then was around credibility and how credibility is a real concern. And quite simply, people were expressing the need to just understand exactly where PensionBot was sourcing its information from. Sounds fair enough, right? In some instances, people noticed that PensionBot had sourced content from less familiar places. There was one particular example where a participant spotted that information had been sourced from a third-party consultancy. They weren't particularly familiar with that consultancy, and this kind of led them to question the integrity of the answer that it had provided. As Henry kind of touched upon earlier, when we customize PensionBot to source its content from trusted places like the Financial Conduct Authority, we observed, though, that it had referenced answers from kind of outside of this original scope. So getting that content credibility just right feels like a big obstacle actually to overcome, particularly for a topic like pensions. Given the complexity and anxiety that people can feel, even just when they're thinking about their pension themselves. Having said that, it also does feel like a big opportunity to address as well, right? So if you're able to be explicit about where the content has been sourced, and present it in a way that avoids jargon and uses plain language, could really go a long way in helping to immediately demonstrate the value of a new service like this. So lastly then, our third observation, we framed around kind of keeping inside the guardrails. So what we mean by this was when we configured PensionBot, we were really intentional that it shouldn't give formal financial advice, such as making an investment recommendation. And instead, it should just focus specifically on ensuring that the bot's general guidance it was providing was super accurate. However, as you may have seen in a number of kind of different public cases, controlling Gen AI's output can be a little tricksy at times. And so we tried to mitigate this with carefully crafted instructions and warning messages that appeared at the right time. However, the risks of AI's kind of misbehavior and the potential harm it could cause shouldn't be taken lightly. And this presents a real challenge, specifically in this use case of the advice gap. When we were configuring PensionBot, it wasn't always doing quite what we expected to do, and we had to go around kind of various loops of iteration to get it just right. And at times, the process of configuring it actually felt a little unclear, and even felt a little unreliable at times. And this presents some questions that we'd need to answer. For example, how do you ensure its responses are always correct and don't risk causing user harm? How can you actually just test it in a way that you can be confident that it will continue to always be correct? And then lastly, how do you ensure that it doesn't misbehave in the future? All of this kind of leads to a fairly fuzzy process right now. And these questions feel like some big obstacles actually to overcome before a service like PensionBot could be considered ready for launch. And so I'll just leave you on a quick quote from Tom, who kind of just remarked when we were going through this process about how it could be more like working with a slightly unpredictable person rather than perhaps the predictability of a machine. I'm going to hand over to Chloe now, who's just going to wrap things up for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. So we're coming towards the end of our session today, and I just wanted to sort of run through some of the key things that we've spoken about and what we've learned from our time starting to work with AI. Sam, could you? Oh, perfect, thank you. So the first thing I think was that it's just so important just to get started. Try stuff out, prototype ideas, and do it in a safe space just before you launch it into the world. Um, and then that also gives you really amazing space so that you can actually test it with users and get that invaluable feedback about how to make it work really well, so that then your AI products just work perfectly for the users, or as well as they possibly can do. Henry also touched on how we tested with experts, and that was a fantastic way just to gauge the quality. Henry was touching on how testing with experts was a really great way to just gauge the quality of the responses that something like ChatGPT is giving, just keep those people involved as well. And then I also wanted to mention about how with this insight, you just need to iterate over it. So we've found Gen AI to be incredibly unpredictable at times and really hard to program. So it does specific things. So if you want it to sort of get to a better place where it's doing more things that you want it to be doing, you really just need to keep making changes and tweaks until it gets to that point where you're happy. And I just wanted to recap some of the things that we learned, and hopefully some things that maybe if you're going to build a chatbot using ChatGPT, you might be able to use when you're doing that as well, just to make it really work for users. The first thing that I'm thinking about was bringing it back to that blank page syndrome. So you need to make it really short, really make it really clear how your bot can help, and have it give prompts if you can, so that then people don't get bored and stop using it because they don't know how its full capabilities. You also need to be really mindful about where information is coming from. So try to surface this where possible so that people can make more informed decisions about whether to take on that information or not. And as I've said this already, but AI can behave in really unpredictable ways. So you need to test it. You need to be confident in how it's going to behave before making it live. So what is next? So I said about the fact that we're doing these mini experiments. Our next mini experiment that we really wanted to look at was voice interaction. And that's for a few different reasons. I think the first reason was that when we were testing out our pension bot, we actually found that it was a really nice thing to be able to do, to talk to a bot rather than typing in your questions all the time. So we wanted to do that. And then with the introduction of ChatGPT 4.0 that came out earlier this week, that voice capability seems to have just skyrocketed. So we're really interested in just seeing what we can do with that, and how that can bring things to life in a way that maybe things like Alexa and Siri haven't been able to. We're also creating a community where we sort of want to share learnings and challenges. Like I said right at the beginning, I think that bringing people together to help overcome some of these challenges and to just really empower each other to do really well in the AI space is something that we're really keen on doing. So if you are interested in talking to us about it, or if you want to share anything that you've learned as well, so we can create a little community, then please get in touch with us, because that is something that we would absolutely love to do. Right, I think let's open it up for some questions then. I don't know, Lauren, have we got any that have come into the Slido?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you so much, guys. That was brilliant. And we've had loads of questions coming in already. So we'll start going through them. If you do have any more, please do add them to the Slido and we'll try and get through them all. If we don't, we'll follow up afterwards and can answer any questions you have. So the first one that we've had is, would you feel comfortable releasing pension bot to the public?
I can try and sort of give my opinion on this. I think in its current state, no. principally for one of the reasons that which Sam and Chloe touched on, which was us not having complete confidence that would always give, you know, a correct answer, a valid answer to a user's question. And obviously, you know, in the financial world that we're dealing with here, that can potentially be, you know, very harmful to a user. So that would be something that I would be most nervous about if it were going to go live. But you know, I think that just highlights the benefit of prototyping it. You know, it could make an invalid answer here, and it was fine. It was safe. Because we've seen that, we would in principle be able to you know, adjust our instructions or try and make improvements that would try and, you know, stop that from happening again, rather than having gone, you know, live, big bang release, and then seeing the, you know, these things happening. But yeah, it's a that's a difficult challenge to try and overcome for sure. And there have been some high profile cases where a Gen AI has given an incorrect answer on a live service. Air Canada was one, for example, giving incorrect information to a customer. But whilst that's a problem, I think AI is only going to get smarter. You know, that's, as Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, just keeps stressing that over and over. Currently, it's in its least smart form, and it's only going to get exponentially faster from here. So perhaps this is going to be something of a sort of diminishing problem, as it were. But yeah, so in its current state, no. But I think because it's a prototype, we could improve it. So yeah, thanks.
Great.
Henry, could I just build on that as well? Excuse me. There's another question from Emerald, said, is it actually more useful to just use it as a user testing space, and then some more trusted, consistent source of content for the real product to eliminate unpredictability? And I think there's a really good point there. I suppose something to stress here is that what we've done here is move really fast. So we've got, in 3 days, something's out there. We're not claiming that this is a viable real world solution, but what we've done is created something that is testable, that helps us to interact and see how people interact with it. And so, yeah, we're not really verifying the quality of the algorithm, and in this context, although there's elements of that coming out, it's more about how do we just start? How do we get started at moving forward into this space? So yes, absolutely. You would probably want to look at a whole range of products in the market and evaluate those with a greater scale. But this would just get you started.
Well, thank you. The next one we've had is, how is the bot different to just asking ChatGPT the same questions?
I can take this one if it's helpful, but please feel free to build on this. So I think what it was doing was, what we were trying to do was also have in some of the things that we really felt were important when conversing with a ChatGPT about this sort of thing. So we added in a lot of the things around, please make sure you go and seek financial advice. The tone of voice was slightly different. We tried to adapt the tone of voice so it felt slightly more appropriate for talking about pensions, and we also tried to change it as well. So we started off with quite a serious tone of voice, and then I think we realized that because pensions is a quite dry and dull topic that people don't necessarily want to talk about as much, actually making that much more friendly felt a lot more approachable. So we were able to change the tone of voice that ChatGPT used to an extent. It wasn't massively different, but that was quite interesting to have a look at that. Henry, I don't know, can you remember how the responses that ChatGPT gave were different compared to like the ChatGPT versus pension bot? Because I remember that they were different. I can't remember it specifically how.
Yeah, obviously it's super complicated, and I don't obviously fully understand it. But with custom bots, they are faster and give better answers than just the all-round ChatGPT model. At least that's what OpenAI say. Also, one thing that we could do with PensionBot was make it specific to UK pensions from the start. So it wasn't going to start giving pension information about, America or Australia or anything. And users could just talk to it knowing that it was going to give the UK information. But yeah, it's a really good question.
If you're going to do your own experiments, I would also suggest comparing it too, because it's really interesting to see how it compares. So yeah, that's a little tip.
Oh, thanks, guys. The next question we've had is, when designing an AI help solution, is there an ideal amount of time to leave the product in a beta state before going live to give the AI time to learn?
I could jump on this one. I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but I guess maybe I could take something from user research. We have this kind of concept in qualitative research of saturation. In quantitative research, you're talking about sample sizes. We want to have thousands of people to reach statistical significance. In qualitative research, you want to keep going until you're not learning more. And I think it's really interesting with working with Gen AI because it feels more like a qualitative type of research that you're doing. You definitely could do some quant. I'm not a quant specialist, so I'm sure there are people who could talk more about that. But it's a bit like researching with a person. There's an unpredictability, there's a fuzziness there. And suppose it's really, and this isn't something we've done, we've worked at a very small number of tests and this was very rapid. But if we were going to take this work forward, we'd want to kind of scale that up to reach the saturation point where we're not learning anything new. We find that that it's not surprising us when we're trying different things anymore. And I think that that's a useful principle, but it doesn't give you a time limit on when you move from one stage to the next.
Great, thanks, Tom. I think we'll probably have time for one more question, then we'll have to wrap up. So we might have to make it a quick one. But we were asked, is there a general error margin that's expected with the results returned by the bot?
I couldn't put a number on it specifically, but there were definitely errors. I think so. We specifically, I can't remember who mentioned it. I think Sam was mentioning it actually, about how we asked it to specifically only get its content from certain places, and then it ended up using other places as well, even though we specifically told it not to do that. That makes me very skeptical about what the sort of error margin is, because if you don't know where it's getting that content from and you can't control that, then it makes it much more difficult to be like, okay, well, it shouldn't have any sort of error margin because you're only getting it from this sort of group of places or this sort of group of sources. And I think that that's a really interesting one. I think there's other tools like Claude AI, I think is that the right, Tom, that say that they only get things from certain places, and it's supposed to be much more constrained in that way. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
That's what they claim. The reality is rather different. I've found, so I would take those claims lightly and do your own testing.
Yeah. So I would definitely have a look around to see whether or not there's any particular AI solutions that do only get things from certain places or more reputable sources, but I would take that with a pinch of salt because, like Tom said, not always the case. You do really need to test it to make sure that it is actually getting it from the places that you want it to. And yeah.
Yeah, I'd maybe add as well, just coming back to that point about quantitative research. I think we are coming at this very much from a qualitative lens, and alongside this, you probably want to have more rigorous quantitative analysis to work out things like that. How often are mistakes being made, and what's your risk appetite against that, and yeah, so that might be about creating a set of use cases, some sort of testing set of questions, and at scale seeing what you get back and then analysing those results at a much larger scale than we're doing here.
Great, thanks, Tom. I think we're going to have to wrap up there because we've just run over slightly, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much for today's session. It's been brilliant, and thank you to everyone for coming along. I know we didn't manage to get through all of the questions, so that if there is something you'd really like us to answer, feel free to drop it over an email and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. But yeah, thank you guys all so much, and I hope to see you at the next month's talk.